December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Morning light glints off calm water as battleships sit at anchor, crews easing into another routine Sunday. Seaman, First Class Joseph Ramirez, is on the deck of USS Arizona, thinking about breakfast, when the sky begins to scream. It is not a sound he recognizes at first, not artillery, not thunder, but a rising mechanical howl that grows too fast, too loud. He looks up just in time to see a dark shape drop through the clouds, red circles flashing on its wings. Then the harbor erupts, explosions tear steel apart, oil ignites on the water's surface. Men run, slip, burn. The air fills with smoke so thick it turns morning into night. Orders are shouted and swallowed by noise. Ramirez dives behind a bulkhead as a blast throws him flat, ears ringing, mouth tasting of metal. In less than 2 hours, the Pacific Fleet is shattered. From Tokyo to Berlin, the reaction is swift and confident. The strike has done exactly what it was meant to do. In Tokyo, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto listens to early reports with a tightening jaw. He had warned his superiors what war with the United States would mean. Not tactically, but industrially. He had spoken of factories, of time, of a nation that could absorb punishment and keep producing. But his warnings had been brushed aside by a simpler belief that America would not endure. Axis leaders shared this assumption, even if they framed it differently. They saw a divided society, isolationists versus interventionists, labor strikes, racial tension, political gridlock. They watched the Great Depression hollow out confidence and leave millions unemployed. They saw a nation wealthy, yes, but soft. A country of shopkeepers, some said. A nation that fights only when comfortable, others believed. Pearl Harbor was supposed to be the shock that confirmed it. A sudden, humiliating blow. A demonstration of vulnerability. A psychological wound so deep that public opinion would fracture instead of harden. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler reaches his own conclusion within days. America, he believes, is an industrial giant with a fragile spine. Its people, he assumes, will demand retribution, but only briefly. Once losses mount, once coffins return, once rationing begins, political will crack. Hitler declares war on the United States, not because he fears American power, but because he dismisses American resolve. In Rome, Mussolini echoes the same confidence. In Tokyo, senior naval officers predict negotiations within a year. The Axis do not plan for a long war with America. They plan to outlast its patience. What they do not understand, what they have never truly experienced, is a society that has not yet been forced to unify under total threat. In the hours after the attack, President Franklin D. Roosevelt is informed of the damage. He listens in silence. His face shows no panic, no disbelief, only decision. The next day, December 8th, 1941, Roosevelt addresses Congress. A date which will live in infamy. His voice is calm, controlled, precise. There is no call for restraint, no hint of negotiation, no attempt to soften the blow. Congress declares war with near unanimity. Across the country, something changes almost instantly. Recruitment offices are overwhelmed. Men line up around city blocks. Factories receive government contracts within days. Auto plants begin retooling. Shipyards expand beyond anything pre-war planners thought possible. What Axis leaders interpret as shock is, in reality, ignition. They mistake silence for hesitation. They mistake debate for weakness. They mistake diversity for disunity. Within weeks, America is not merely at war. It is reorganizing itself around it. Joseph Ramirez survives Pearl Harbor. He is pulled from the water hours later, burned half blind, shaking uncontrollably. He will spend months recovering. He will eventually return to sea aboard a ship that did not exist when the bombs fell. Neither did most of the fleet that will follow. At the time, Axis leaders see only wreckage and smoke. They do not see the steel orders placed that same week. They do not see the training pipelines forming. They do not see the political fractures closing instead of widening. They believe America has been wounded. They do not yet understand that they have unified it. And once unified, the question is no longer whether the United States will fight. The question becomes how long it will take before its full weight is felt. Everywhere at once. January 1942. Detroit, Michigan, before dawn. The factory floor is already alive. Frank Callahan pulls his jacket tighter as he steps inside the cavernous building that once produced sedans and delivery trucks. The smell is different now. Sharper, heavier. Oil, solvents, hot steel. The familiar shapes of automobile frames have vanished, replaced by jigs and molds he barely recognizes. Overhead, a banner hangs crooked but unmistakable. Production is victory. Callahan is not a soldier. He has never held a rifle. He has never crossed an ocean. But as the war begins its second month, he works 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, riveting sections of aircraft fuselage that will be shipped west by rail before the week is out. This is what Axis leaders never saw coming. They believed America would respond emotionally, not structurally. They expected outrage, followed by exhaustion. Instead, they triggered something far more dangerous. Alignment. Labor disputes freeze overnight. Executives who once competed now coordinate. State governments defer to federal planners without protest. Entire industries accept centralized control in exchange for speed. The United States does not stumble into total war. It chooses it. In Tokyo, intelligence summaries begin arriving that do not fit expectations. Shipbuilding numbers spike. Aircraft output doubles, then triples. Training facilities expand simultaneously across multiple states. New bases appear almost faster than they can be mapped. The reports are flagged as optimistic. In Berlin, similar data is dismissed outright. American production figures, German analysts insist, are theoretical. Bureaucratic exaggeration. Democratic systems cannot maintain discipline long enough to sustain such output. Hitler scoffs at the idea of America fielding a truly modern army at scale. They will drown in committees, he tells his generals. They will argue themselves into paralysis. But paralysis never comes. Instead, the arguments move behind closed doors, and decisions emerge unified. By mid-1942, American convoys are crossing the Atlantic in numbers that shock even British planners. Liberty ships slide down slipways every few days, hulls welded, not riveted. Crews trained before the paint dries. In the Pacific, damaged carriers are repaired in weeks instead of months. New ones follow close behind, each more capable than the last. What Axis leadership fails to grasp is not American capacity. It is American tolerance. Tolerance for loss. Tolerance for delay. Tolerance for scale. American society does not demand immediate victory. It demands inevitability. Frank Callahan hears about battles only in fragments, headlines, radio bulletins during lunch breaks. He knows places like Guadalcanal and Tobruk only as names spoken quickly before the announcer moves on. What he understands clearly is this. The war is not interrupting his life. It is reshaping it, but leaving its foundation intact. His kids still attend school. His wife still shops for groceries. The streets are lit at night. Trains run on schedule. Baseball games are postponed, not cancelled. In Germany and Japan, civilians are already learning to live around sirens. In America, sirens remain hypothetical. That difference compounds quietly. Axis planners assume time will favor them. that American patience will erode as casualties rise. Instead, time becomes America's greatest weapon. By 1943, the United States is fighting on 3 fronts simultaneously: Europe, the Atlantic, and the Pacific, without collapsing under the strain. Not because it avoids mistakes, but because it absorbs them. A failed landing becomes a lesson, not a catastrophe. A sunk ship becomes a replacement order, not a strategic crisis. A lost unit becomes a data point, not a national trauma. In Berlin, German generals begin noticing something unsettling. Every operation now seems to encounter fresh American formations, not reinforced ones, new ones. In the Pacific, Japanese pilots report the same phenomenon. American aircraft return faster than expected. Carrier groups reappear after battles that should have sidelined them for months. Axis leadership begins to realize, too late, that their core assumption was wrong. America is not fighting for immediate results. It is fighting for endurance, and endurance, once organized, does not fade under pressure. President Roosevelt understands this intuitively. He speaks rarely of sacrifice in absolute terms. He frames the war not as a test of suffering, but as a project with milestones. Production targets, shipping goals, training schedules. Victory is not emotional. It is procedural. That procedural mindset terrifies Axis planners far more than American rhetoric ever could. Because a war fought on procedure does not break when morale dips. It simply continues. By the end of 1943, the miscalculation is undeniable. America has not tired. It has not fractured. It has not slowed. It has accelerated. The shock of Pearl Harbor did not exhaust American will. It removed all ambiguity about how that will would be used. And once the United States committed fully, politically, economically, socially, the war ceased to be a contest of daring or brilliance. It became a contest of sustainability. One side had planned for a short war decided by shock. The other had quietly prepared for a long one decided by momentum. And momentum, once gained, is almost impossible to stop. August 1943. Kursk Front, Soviet Union. General Major Otto Weiss stands beside a command vehicle camouflaged with branches already turning yellow at the edges. Dust coats his boots. The smell of burned fuel and overheated engines hangs low over the steppe. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another American-built tank is burning. Not German, not Soviet, but one shipped across an ocean Weiss once believed would protect his enemies. He watches his staff officers speak in clipped tones, voices drained of confidence. "They replaced it again," one of them says. "Another Lend-Lease shipment. New vehicles. New radios." Weiss says nothing. He is beginning to understand something that has nothing to do with tactics. For years, German war planning assumed that enemies would crack under pressure. Politically, socially, psychologically. France had fallen that way. So had others. Even Britain, many believed, would eventually negotiate once its cities bled enough. America was supposed to follow the same pattern. Instead, America appears to be getting stronger the longer the war lasts. Not sharper, not more brilliant, heavier, thicker, more permanent. On paper, Germany still fields experienced officers, disciplined formations, and hard-won battlefield knowledge. But experience now counts for less when it cannot be replaced. Every German loss cuts deeper than the last. Every American loss barely registers before the next unit arrives. Weiss reads intercepted intelligence summaries late at night, factory outputs, troop movement estimates, shipping figures so large they feel abstract. They are no longer abstract. They are rolling toward him on tracks stamped with English serial numbers. In Berlin, the realization spreads unevenly. Some senior officers grasp the danger immediately. Others refuse to accept it. Hitler himself oscillates between denial and rage, blaming commanders, weather, fate, anything but the underlying imbalance. He still believes American society is soft. That belief has become an article of faith. But faith cannot stop arithmetic. By 1943, American air power begins to reshape the war in Europe. Bombers arrive in formations that stretch across the sky, escorted by fighters that no longer turn back at the edge of range. Factories that survive one raid are hit again, and again, and again. German civilians now live under the same sirens Americans never hear. The difference is timing. Germany enters this phase exhausted. America enters it fresh. In the Pacific, the realization is even starker. After Midway and Guadalcanal, Japanese commanders stop planning decisive battles. They begin planning delays. Each island becomes a calculation. How many days can this position cost the enemy before it falls? The answer is always the same: not enough. American landings do not pause between operations. Supplies flow in parallel. Construction battalions follow assault waves. Airfields appear where jungles stood days earlier. Japanese planners had assumed American democracy would balk at casualties. Instead, they encounter a system that budgets for them. Losses are not triggers for retreat. They are inputs. By late 1943, even Axis propaganda shifts tone. Gone are promises of imminent victory. In their place are appeals to endurance, sacrifice, destiny. Those appeals land poorly, because endurance is easier when the future looks finite. For Germany and Japan, the future now looks infinite and hostile. Every month the war continues. American strength grows. Every month, Axis strength shrinks. This asymmetry changes how officers think, fight, and eventually surrender. German POWs begin speaking of America not with hatred, but with disbelief. They fight, one says, as if losing today means nothing. In a sense, they are right, because American strategy is no longer centered on avoiding loss. It is centered on outlasting it. Frank Callahan, back in Detroit, does not know Otto Weiss exists. He does not know where Kursk is. He does not know how many tanks burned that day. He only knows that production targets increased again this week, and he will meet them. That quiet certainty, multiplied across millions of ordinary lives, is what Axis leaders never learned how to measure. They mistook American comfort for weakness. They mistook distance for indifference. They mistook debate for paralysis. What they failed to see was this: once American society accepted that the war would be long, it stopped asking how much the war would cost. It began asking how long it would take. And that question has only one possible answer. February 1944. 8th Air Force Headquarters, England. Colonel James "Jimmy" Doolan rubs his eyes and looks again at the operations board. Colored pins cover the map of Europe so densely that the original borders are almost invisible. Red for targets struck, blue for fighter coverage, yellow for scheduled sorties. There are no empty spaces anymore. The briefing room hums with quiet confidence. Not bravado, not optimism. Something steadier, predictable. Doolan remembers the early days, when every mission felt experimental, when bomber streams turned back early, when losses threatened morale, when commanders worried how long public support would last if casualty lists grew too long. Those questions are gone. Now the question is simply sequencing. What do we hit next? American aircraft no longer probe German defenses. They grind them down. Day after day, formations take off in weather that would have grounded earlier air forces. Crews brief, fly, bomb, land, debrief, then do it again. Replacement crews arrive already trained. Replacement aircraft arrive already fueled. Losses are tragic, but they are not disruptive. This is the difference Axis leaders never accounted for. They expected America to fight like a nation defending itself at the edge of collapse. Instead, America fights like an industrial process. In Germany, Albert Speer works desperately to rationalize production under impossible conditions. Factories are dispersed, hidden, rebuilt after raids. Output rises, impressively so given the circumstances. But it is always reactive. American production is proactive. Speer builds faster because he must. America builds faster because it planned to. By mid-1944, the weight of American endurance becomes impossible to ignore. Normandy, June 6, 1944. As Allied troops storm the beaches, German commanders react with confusion, not because they lack intelligence, but because the scale defies expectation. The landings are not a gamble. They are an inevitability. Even as German units counterattack, even as casualties mount, Allied supply continues uninterrupted. Mulberry harbors rise from the sea. Fuel pipelines snake under the channel. Trucks roll inland in numbers no European army has ever sustained. German officers do the math. If this force is stopped here, another will come. If it bleeds today, it will return tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. American will is no longer a question. It is a constant. In the Pacific, the same pattern repeats across oceans. Saipan, Tinian, Light, Iwo Jima. Each island fight is brutal. Each costs lives. Each sparks headlines back home. And yet the American public does not demand withdrawal. They demand completion. War bonds sell out. Factories expand again. Training pipelines widen. The war has become a national project with an end date, not a crisis-threatening collapse. Japanese planners, watching carrier after carrier arrive, realize too late that they misjudged the nature of their enemy. They thought America's strength lay in wealth. It lies in replacement. By late 1944, Axis leadership no longer speaks privately about victory. They speak about negotiation, delay, miracles. Hitler pins hope on wonder weapons. Japanese commanders pin hope on sacrifice. Both are admissions. They are betting against time. America is betting on it. Frank Callahan, now a foreman, signs off on another production report. His hands ache. His hair has gone grey faster than expected. He does not complain. Neither does the country. There are strikes, debates, arguments, elections. But the war effort continues unchanged. That, more than any speech, signals the outcome. Because the Axis miscalculation was not tactical, it was psychological. They believed American society would fracture under sustained loss. Instead, it normalized sacrifice without normalizing despair. By early 1945, the question is no longer whether the Axis will lose. It is how much of themselves they will lose before it ends. The war's outcome was sealed not when American troops landed in Europe, but when Axis leaders realized too late that American will was not a spike of anger after Pearl Harbor. It was a baseline. April 1945. Berlin. Underground Führerbunker. The concrete walls sweat from artillery shock. Dust drifts down with every distant impact, fine and grey, settling on maps that no longer reflect reality. Red arrows, once optimistic, then defiant, now point nowhere at all. Adolf Hitler stands hunched over a table, hands trembling, eyes fixed on a front that exists only on paper. The Americans are across the Elbe. That fact, more than the Soviet guns closing in from the east, gnaws at him. Because the Americans were never supposed to be here. Not like this. Not in these numbers. Not this intact. For years, Hitler had dismissed the United States as a decadent, divided society. Industrial, yes, but soft. He believed racial ideology explained everything. That a nation built on immigrants, consumer comfort, and political argument would fracture under sustained war. It was a comforting belief. It allowed him to fight Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States simultaneously without accepting what logic demanded. Now the cost of that belief surrounds him. In the West, American armies advance with mechanical inevitability. Bridges are repaired faster than they can be destroyed. Rivers are crossed in days, not weeks. Units rotate, refit, advance again. German soldiers surrender in groups, not because they are cowards, but because resistance no longer feels meaningful. They are not stopping anything. They are delaying a machine that does not notice delay. General Dwight D. Eisenhower stands in a forward headquarters near Rheims, listening to reports with quiet attentiveness. He does not speak of triumph. He speaks of logistics, supply flow, and coordination with the Soviets. Victory is assumed. The task is management. That too was unthinkable to Axis planners in 1941. They expected America to fight emotionally, with surges and collapses. Instead, America fights administratively. In the Pacific, the pattern is identical. Okinawa burns, kamikaze attacks still strike ships, still kill sailors, still shock crews hardened by years of war. But they do not change the schedule. Damaged carriers withdraw, are repaired, and return. New carriers arrive already trained, already integrated into doctrine, refined by relentless experience. Japanese commanders know the truth now. They had mistaken American patience for weakness. They had mistaken American debate for division. They had mistaken American distance from the battlefield for indifference. What they failed to understand is that American society did not mobilize in desperation. It mobilized in layers. When one layer strained, another absorbed the load. When one generation fought, another trained behind it. When one city produced, another expanded. There was no breaking point, because the system was not built around a single point. On April 12, 1945, Franklin D. Roosevelt dies. Axis leaders briefly hope the shock will fracture American resolve. It does not. Harry Truman is sworn in. Orders continue. Operations proceed unchanged. The war effort does not pause for grief. That moment, quiet and procedural, marks the final proof of miscalculation. American will is not tied to one man. It is institutional. In Germany, surrender comes in fragments. Units capitulate. Cities fall. Orders stop arriving. In Japan, leaders debate whether national annihilation is preferable to admission of defeat. All of it stems from the same error made years earlier. They believed America would burn out. Instead, it scaled up. When the war ends, the Axis does not face an exhausted enemy. It faces one already planning the next phase of history. Reconstruction, occupation, deterrence. The outcome was decided long before the last shots were fired. It was decided the moment Axis leaders mistook American outrage for temporary fury, rather than what it truly was, a trigger. One that activated the full depth of a society capable of fighting indefinitely without destroying itself. September 1945, Tokyo Bay. The water is calm, almost indifferent, as the grey hull of the USS Missouri rests at anchor. Sailors stand at attention along the rails, uniforms pressed, faces unreadable. Cameras click softly. Pens are uncapped. The war ends not with chaos, but with paperwork. Japanese officials step forward to sign the instrument of surrender. Their movements are precise, ceremonial, restrained. Around them stands the full weight of American power. Carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, fleets assembled not in desperation, but in surplus. General Douglas MacArthur watches silently. This moment, like so many before it, unfolds exactly as planned. And that is the final lesson. The Axis had believed that America's entry into the war would be explosive but unsustainable. That initial fury would fade into political fracture, economic strain, public exhaustion. They expected a nation that would fight emotionally. What they encountered was a nation that fought structurally. From December 1941 onward, the United States did not ask whether the war was worth sustaining. It asked how to sustain it indefinitely. Factories were not merely expanded, they were duplicated. Supply lines were not optimized, they were overbuilt. Training systems were not rushed. They were standardized, scaled, and refined. Losses were absorbed, analyzed, and compensated for. Mistakes became doctrine. Doctrine became habit. Habit became inevitability. In Europe, American divisions arrived faster than Germany could destroy them. In the Pacific, carriers appeared faster than Japan could sink them. In the air, pilots rotated home while replacements trained behind them. At sea, damaged ships returned while new ones slid down slipways. This was not bravery overwhelming cowardice. It was continuity overwhelming attrition. Axis leaders had underestimated not American courage, but American tolerance for duration. They believed war would exhaust the United States as it exhausted Europe. They did not understand that exhaustion requires proximity. American cities did not burn. American farms did not empty. American schools did not close. American factories did not collapse. The war demanded sacrifice, but it did not consume civilian life. That distinction changed everything. By the time Germany and Japan realized their error, it could not be corrected. Germany had mobilized until it broke. Japan had mobilized until it collapsed. Both had mistaken intensity for endurance. America had built endurance into the system from the start. After the surrender, the United States does not demobilize into weakness. It transitions. Factories convert to civilian production. Soldiers return to education. Infrastructure expands rather than decays. The same systems that sustained war now sustain peace. Marshall plans replace bombing plans. Logistics feed cities instead of armies. Administration replaces annihilation. This too had been miscalculated. Axis leaders believed America would retreat inward after victory. Instead, it reshaped the world. The war's outcome was not sealed by a single battle, nor by a single leader's decision. It was sealed by a fundamental misunderstanding that American will was emotional, fragile, and temporary. In reality, it was procedural, scalable, and permanent once activated. Pearl Harbor did not provoke America into rage. It activated a system. And once activated, that system did not stop. Not in Europe, not in the Pacific, not at victory. History often remembers wars as clashes of armies. But this war was decided by something colder and more decisive. Which societies could fight without destroying themselves? The Axis fought until they had nothing left. America fought until the enemy did. That miscalculation changed the outcome of the war and the shape of the modern world.